A couple of years ago, I used one of the early AI tools to help me revise my onboarding email sequence. And I was able to make it sound more enthusiastic, which is something that I sometimes find a little bit hard in the written word to really convey excitement, passion, etc., etc. So I'd used this tone adjuster, as it were, from AI. And recently I was re-editing it to make sure it was all still accurate. And honestly, I was completely mortified. and in fact, if you've ever received these emails from me, then I apologize, because the shift already from what feels acceptable, it was so clearly AI written. It had rocket emojis and confetti cannon emojis all over it. And I feel like what passed even a year ago doesn't necessarily pass now.